Like I shared earlier, this morning we're kicking off our new sermon series called Faith at the Movies. The first movie we're looking at is called The King's Speech, in conjunction with the story of Esther that Heidi just read. For both of these stories demonstrate the fact that God helps God's people find their voice, along with discovering courage and bravery to speak up at critical moments in history. It takes time to find our voice and have confidence in it to speak up. Both are not easy tasks, and they don't come quickly. Now, I would say there's a couple of barriers that stand in our way of us finding our voice and speaking confidently with it. First, we think we have to sound like someone else. Recall a time when you said something and you immediately thought, oh my God, I sound like my mother. Oh my God, did my dad just come out of my mouth? Or even, we will find ourselves saying phrases that our mentors have said or our teachers have uttered, and all the while we think, where's my voice? Where am I in this? Now, I think the second barrier is going to be control. Why? Because speaking up is a vulnerable act. Now, to remind you what vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Anybody want to do vulnerability? The hard part is that life is vulnerable, but we want to control the outcomes. And so often, we have spoken up in various situations where we've been ridiculed and didn't even know what was going to be coming, criticized for what we said. And so now I think we've become so conditioned to being afraid that how people may respond to us when we speak up, that we start to revert kind of like a turtle in a shell. Like, I'm only coming out and speaking up when I know I can control the response and it's only going to be positive and affirming. Now, the third one is, I think this happens often. We feel like our voices aren't valued. Think of a time, maybe you were at work at a meeting and you offer up something at the meeting, all of a sudden to find out that people just passed you over in that moment, then to watch your male colleague say the exact same word, and everyone thought, oh my God, that's so brilliant! And you're sitting here going, I just said the same thing. Why did you not hear me? This especially happens to women. The other reality, too, is people say, hey, I need you to serve on a committee. I want you to come volunteer with us. And you go, yes, great, I want to help out. And you want to show up, you've got your list of ideas, only to find out that you've been asked to join the committee just to be a guest person. Don't speak up, don't have any ideas. We're just maintaining the status quo. We just needed to fill a seat, and we don't want to hear anything radical or different or anything that means change. When you've had a number of these experiences, when you've faced each of these barriers, no wonder we are very hesitant to speak up in our lives. We've been blasted by family and friends. We've been blasted by strangers, and we think, what is the point? Maybe somebody else should just speak up because my voice clearly doesn't matter. But here's the good news this morning. God has always called on people who thought their voices did not matter. I'm going to say it again because I know someone's got to hear it this morning. God has always called on people who thought their voices did not matter. Now, whether it was because society thought that they were weak, that they were female, that their past was too damaged, or that they were too young, God works through the people the rest of the society would quickly overlook. Whether it was King David, who was the youngest of his family, to be called the next king of Israel, or whether it was Mary, the mother of Jesus, who was just a teenager when the angel Gabriel said, guess what, you're going to be the mother of the Son of God. Or who would have thought that Mary Magdalene, a former prostitute and a disciple of Jesus Christ, would be the first to see the risen Jesus and proclaim his resurrection to all the other male disciples. God has a way of calling those who thought their voices didn't matter. You see, God never calls those that we think are equipped and perfect already. God actually calls those people we least expect and then equips them. For God says to these people in the moment, I need you to speak up. I need you to speak up for such a time as this. And then every time that God comes calling, ask any of the prophets in the Old Testament, they go, please pick someone else. But God says, no, it's you. It's your voice. But here's the other blessing and the good news this morning is God never says, and good luck, you're on your own. God always says, I am with you every step of the way. Do not be afraid. And so in the king's speech and Esther's story, we are reminded once again how God works through human instruments for such a time as this, helping them find their God-given voice, build confidence within themselves to speak that voice against evil. God also helps them step into this vulnerable moment, risking their status and prestige to advocate for the oppressed and vulnerable, and to bring hope to one another during difficult times. Now, first, the king's speech tells the story of Prince Albert, known as Bertie to his family, and how he becomes the next king of England. For who could have ever anticipated that the second child of King George V, who stammered his whole entire life, would be the next king of England? The movie also shares his struggle to find his voice and his confidence as he stammers during public speaking, making his royal duties excruciatingly painful for him. Bertie also knows the pressure that is on his shoulders to act and sound like someone other than himself, to sound like his father. And in doing so, it becomes a barrier for him to find his own voice and the confidence that he could one day be king. Now, at one point in the movie, his father, King George V, has just finished his Christmas speech on the radio wireless, and Bertie is there. His older brother, David, is nowhere to be seen, and the father turns to Bertie and says, now sit down, I want you to practice this, because the reality is your brother is shirking his royal responsibilities. Prince David is seeing Wallis Simpson, a twice divorced woman. And so the father already anticipates there's going to be some struggle because as David is meant to succeed him on the throne, David cannot marry a twice divorced woman because it's against the rules in the Church of England. And as the king of the Church of England, that's a big no-no. So the King George V already knows his son, Bertie, is most likely going to be the next one in line. So he says, okay, you sit down, you need to practice. So Bertie, you can already see him just rot with fear and trembling. He sits down, he takes his father's speech, and he's about to start, and already he starts stammering. He can't even get to the first word. And then we watch in horror as his father yells at him, "Get it out, boy!" And we as the audience can feel and want to scream through the TV like, that's not helping. That's not going to make him speak any better. So Bertie just feels utterly hopeless. There's no cure for him. But that's where Elizabeth, Bertie's wife, holds on to hope for him. Because here's the thing about spouses. They have an ability to see the greatness in you when you cannot see it in yourself. And that's what Elizabeth does for Bertie in this moment. She knows that he is meant to be a great leader, who has a voice and has something to say. But of course, his confidence in his voice is standing in the way for him to see that in himself. So she pursues this unorthodox idea of having Bertie see a speech therapist, Australian Lionel Logue. I would say the Christ figure in the story is Lionel. Lionel is nobody of substantial background. He doesn't have a degree or a doctorate to practice. It doesn't help also that he's from Australia, which makes him an obvious outsider, and is often seen with suspicion by those in Bertie's closest circles. So when Bertie hesitantly accepts his first appointment with Lionel, things start to slowly change. A light starts to break into the darkness. Hope for him begins to emerge. But it's not just because Bertie's attending these practices and these speech therapy appointments. It's all because of relationship and how Lionel treats Bertie. First of all, Bertie has to come to Lionel so that it is even between the two of them. Also, Lionel says, I'm going to call you Bertie, you're going to call me Lionel. You can see Bertie go, where's the royal protocol? And he's so uncomfortable because for the first time in his entire life, he's not just a royal, he's a human being. A human being who longs to be seen, who longs to be heard. So we watch over the course of the movie how they start to build trust with one another. Lionel's incredibly patient with Bertie's temper and frustration because stammering is so hard when you want to speak and cannot get the words out. But that's the way of Christ, to see people as their full selves, not their disability, not their hindrance of speaking, to see people as their whole selves. Christ was also humble and did not go around demanding that everyone treat him as a king or be addressed as the Messiah and Savior. Instead, Christ was always helping God's children find their own voice, especially those who are literally mute or those muted by society because of their gender, their ailments, or their socioeconomic status. Another way that Lionel helps Bertie is not to be governed by fear. And if that is one thing that Christ came for all of us, is to help us not be governed by fear too. So when it's clear that Bertie's older brother David will renounce the throne, Bertie is in great turmoil because he cannot believe that he will have to be king. But it is Lionel who tells him and believes in him that he could do it. And on the eve of his coronation, Lionel and Bertie are rehearsing in Westminster Cathedral, and Bertie starts projecting his fear about becoming a king onto Lionel. But Lionel is so centered and grounded in himself, he clearly knows what's happening. And so Bertie is facing away from Lionel and just venting and letting it all out. And so Lionel sits in the coronation chair, rather smugly. And so Bertie turns around, sees him there, and enraged yells, "Get up! You can't sit there! Get up!" And Lionel responds calmly, "Why not? It's just a chair." Bertie explains, that's not a chair, it's St. Edward's chair. And Lionel looks at the chair and says, "People have carved their names on it." And Bertie, exasperated, stammers, you, and Lionel continues, "I don't care how many royals have sat in this chair." And Bertie yells, "Listen to me! Listen to me!" Lionel, remaining seated, says, "Listen to you, by what right?" And Bertie says, "By divine right, if you must. I'm your king." And Lionel replies, "No, you're not. You just told me you didn't want it. Why should I waste my time listening to you?" Bertie says, "Because I have a right to be heard. I have a voice." The cathedral goes utterly silent. Lionel finally replies, "Yes, you do." And he stands before Bertie and he affirms him, saying, "You have such perseverance, Bertie. You're the bravest man I know. You're going to make a really good king." In the book of Esther, we also find a woman who is being called upon to lead. No one thought that an orphan Jewish woman being raised by her cousin Mordecai would be chosen to be the next queen of Persia, which is modern-day Iran. Now, the book of Esther tells the story of the Jewish diaspora of the Persian Empire during the 4th century BCE. Now, that's before Common Era, or you may know, before Christ is born. Now, from the beginning of the book of Esther, we learn that king Ahasuerus is looking for a new queen. Vashti, the current queen, has been ousted for not obeying the king's orders to show the people and all of his officials her beauty during a celebration. So her refusal embarrasses the king in front of the other men, and now there's this great search to find the next queen. And Esther becomes the one chosen. But the king has no idea she's Jewish. Then one day King Ahasuerus promotes a man named Haman to be in a seat above all other seats and officials who are with the king. And all of the king's servants are required to bow down to Haman as the king commanded. But I'll let you know on a little secret, Haman is not a good guy. Not only is he arrogant, but we quickly find out that he has this deep hatred for anyone who threatens his sense of privilege. So Esther's older cousin Mordecai, who raised her, refuses to bow down to Haman one day because of his faith. For Mordecai knows he's only meant to bow down to God. And so while this infuriates Haman, but Haman goes to the extreme. He doesn't punish Mordecai for not following the law. Instead, he says, I'm going to execute all of the Jews for his insolence. And so Haman goes to the king and says, Sir, there's all of these people who are not following your laws, these Jews that are living in your country. So let's just get rid of them. And I will even pay to help you get rid of them and put money in your treasury so that we can get rid of them. And the king agrees. So a decree goes out, and Mordecai is beside himself. He runs to the palace and he tells Esther what's happened. And Esther says, you know what? Here's the problem. I can't just go to the king. You have to be called upon. And if I just go to the king, he will likely kill me. So I can't really do anything. And Mordecai tells her this, that her position as queen will not protect her as a Jew. Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all of the other Jews. For if you keep silent at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this. Mordecai wants her to see that where she's located is an opportunity for God to speak through her and use her power, her privilege, her location to speak up for the Jews. And this hits her really hard. She stops and thinks and she says, okay, Mordecai, I want you all of the Jewish brothers and sisters living in Persia, I want you to take a 3-day fast, and I'm going to fast as well. And here's the deal, I will go to the king, and if I perish, I will perish. Because she knows that God is calling upon her at this moment, not to stand by as thousands of Jews are killed. Both Bertie and Esther are called upon for such a time as this. They no longer can stay quiet. People's lives are on the line. And so we watch and wonder, will they be able to make the speech of their lives? Will they be able to speak up confidently with their God-given voice, risking their reputation and credibility, and even their lives? Or will they stay safe in the shadows and stay silent? Now, in the king's speech, Bertie is required to give his first wartime speech once again because England has declared war on Germany at the beginning of World War II. And so less than an hour before Bertie is to give this first wartime speech, fear once more sets in. And I think this is our learning too this morning. That once you find your voice and have confidence in yourself, the fear doesn't go away. It's not like, I'm going to be fine every time I have to speak up going forward. It feels like we start back at ground zero. But still, it does not mean that means we should never speak up or stay silent. So less than an hour beforehand, Bertie calls Lionel in to go over the speech into practice. And in one moment of self-doubt and frustration, Bertie turns to Lionel and says, if I am a king, where's my power? Can I form a government? Can I levy a tax, declare war? No. And yet I am in the seat of all authority. Why? Because the nation believes that when I speak for them. And Lionel once again reminds Bertie it's showtime. Lionel follows Birdie into a very small room where it's just the two of them, so Birdie can record the speech on wireless. Everyone holds their breath, waiting for Birdie to begin. It's this haunting moment because we're very afraid that he won't be able to do it. But then, word by word, sentence by sentence, Birdie delivers a speech that enters the homes of all of his people, reassuring them that the king is with them at this most chaotic and perilous time. For Esther, she too spoke up for such a time as this. Esther strategically places herself where the king notices her, and the king asks, what's her request? And she said, hey, why don't you guys come to a banquet, you and Haman, that I'm hosting, and then that would be great. So on the second day of the banquet, the king says, Esther, what is your petition and what is your request? And she says boldly, if I have won your favor, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given to me. That is my petition. And the lives of my people, that is my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. No enemy can compensate for this damage to the king. The king is shocked and said, who is this foe? Who is this enemy? And that is where Esther, in her brilliance, has laid the groundwork perfectly and points to Haman and says, that is the enemy and that is the foe. And so Haman is executed and the Jews are protected. Both Birdie and Esther trust the voice that God has given them. Sure, there is fear and trepidation, but that did not hold them back from speaking up for such a time as this. My brothers and sisters, I know this, that it is hard to trust our God-given voice, but we too cannot be silenced, and we will not be silenced when it comes to issues of justice in our world, for God is calling upon us for such a time as this. So we will stay vulnerable and keep speaking our God-given truth, knowing that we cannot control how people are going to respond to us. But we will not stay silent when speaking up for the oppressed. We will not stop speaking up to end violence and oppression for marginalized populations. Where is God calling you to use your voice for such a time as this? Because your voice matters, and you have a right to be heard. Amen.